Hi, my name's Glina, Australian technology consultant and computer science educator. I'd like to have a chat about something that's been in the news recently in the last week, which is the Australian social media ban for kids under 16 years old. You might have heard of this. So our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has been over in New York visiting the United Nations, has been there as part of the UN General Assembly, and has been talking about this ban, which is due to come into effect in Australia from December. He's also had some interest while he's been over there from Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. So one wonders whether something similar to this might be rolled out in Europe. I think she's said that she's been very impressed by Australia's approach, but kind of wants to see how it goes in Australia first. So I thought we might look over some of the articles about this that have appeared in the Australian press, and thinking about perhaps whether there's a kind of a dichotomy, maybe a false dichotomy that's been set up between kids' safety on the one hand and protecting children's human rights on the other hand, which is a line that's been put forward by X, Elon Musk's social network. And I'd like to propose maybe there might be a third option here that we haven't thought of. So let's take a look. Okay, so the first article here is from Australian paper, the Sydney Morning Herald. So the headline is, Elon Musk's X says social media ban will violate human rights. Violate human rights. So Elon Musk's company X, I think it's important to point out here that it wasn't Elon Musk who said this, but X has said this in a submission to an Australian government inquiry. He's accused the Albanese government, Anthony Albanese is the Australian Prime Minister, kind of like the equivalent of the American president, sort of, kind of not, maybe, the head in the Australian government, of undermining children's rights by curbing their free speech and access to information. So talks something about US President Donald Trump's relationship with Musk. Well, we all know the history of that. We don't have to rehash that again. So it's a Senate inquiry in Australia. X has said less than 1% of its Australian users are under 16. It said its content moderation teams could protect young people, etc., saying they've repeatedly tangled with the E-Safety Commissioner, which is the Australian government, a kind of organisation that's set up to try to protect people online, children and others. And he said, we have serious concerns, this is not Musk, but this is X in their submission, serious concerns as to the lawfulness of the social media minimum age, including compatibility with other regulations and laws, including international human rights treaties to which Australia is signatory. So, yeah, and mentioning the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So that's an interesting question. The social media ban, is it lawful to sort of ban children 16 years and under from using particular social media platforms? Are we violating their human rights and preventing them from reading information online, from communicating with other people, from forming communities, from expressing themselves? They want the start of the ban to be pushed back 6 months. So currently the ban is going to come in place on the 10th of December. So maybe for a bit of background, the under 16 social media ban is about kids under 16 years old having accounts on social media. So this is going to be a requirement that certain platforms would try to find which users on the platform are under 16 years old and basically suspending or deleting their accounts, and then making sure that anybody new who wants to come and sign up to the platform has to go through some kind of age verification process. And there's been a lot of talk about what that process might be as well, which is another topic of conversation. So Communications Minister Annika Wells, this is the Australian Government Communications Minister, said that X's claims are wrong because they're acting to support children's well-being. So what do you think? Comment down below. Is it about... Are we violating children's human rights by preventing them from using social media? Or the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child also says that we should protect children. It's sort of setting up this dichotomy, isn't it? It's sort of safety versus rights versus expression. Evidence about the harms inflicted on children. And there's a picture of Annika Wells, who travelled to New York with the Prime Minister, mentioned at the start of the video. So Annika Wells and Anthony Albanese have been over there for the UN General Assembly, and as part of being over there are kind of spruiking the social media ban. Of course, we mentioned the history between Trump and Musk, which is well known, and I'm not going to get into that here. But there's also history between Trump and Australia and other countries who he perceives as being against the interests of American big tech. So Trump posting on Truth Social in August that he'll stand up to countries that attack our incredible American tech companies. I can't do a good Donald Trump voice, I won't try, but you can imagine it in his voice. So he's saying he'll impose substantial additional tariffs. This is something that Australia is worried about, in terms of if we're bringing in these laws ostensibly to protect children, is this going to kind of get the ire of the United States and of President Trump? We worry about this in other policies that we have in Australia too, like our pharmaceutical benefits scheme that allows you to get cheaper medicine on the public purse. It's sort of like, how do US pharmaceutical companies feel about that? And is that going to lead us into kind of greater, tariff pressure from the US? So, and then this will be in the next article that I cover, Arnica Wells talking about gaming and messaging apps would not fall under the ban, but it was incumbent on platforms to demonstrate to the e-safety commissioner, that's Julie Inman Grant, who's actually an American, who's now an Australian, originally from America, that they were not harbouring harmful behaviour. So, I think this is interesting. Again, like I said, it's this dichotomy, isn't it, between... It's almost this feeling of we have to ban children from under 16 from using social media platforms because they're definitely harmful and we have to protect their safety. And then people coming from the other direction, which is not just Elon Musk and X, it's also some academics within Australia who are coming out saying that there are concerns about children's human rights. And, talking about minority groups, whether it's kind of LGBT kids or others who are trying to kind of form and be part of communities on the internet. If we sort of take away their access to social media, does that mean that they can't be part of those communities? And I think there's a question here in my mind too about are social media platforms like X, like Facebook, like Instagram, are these the only ways that we can communicate online? And again, it's just a false dichotomy. It's sort of, if we stop children from using these platforms, that there's no other way they can communicate. Maybe this sounds a little bit flippant, but I used to remember when I was a kid sort of starting clubs at school, and you do newsletters on paper. And you kind of print it out and you take it into the library and you take it to the photocopier and you'd put kind of 10-cent coins into the photocopier and you'd reproduce copies of it. I think that there are kind of offline ways to form groups and to communicate with other people. There's analog ways. Maybe there might be online services that are less harmful than the ones out there at the moment that have a business model of mining user data and mining attention. And I'll come to that a little bit later in a plug for my own product. But let's move on to the next article. So this is from Information Age, and this is a publication of the Australian Computer Society, the ACS. So Meta, Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, X, Roblox, which has had a bit of bad press about whether there are kind of enough protections in place to prevent children being exploited on that platform. Lego Play, this is an interesting one. And again, I'll get back to talking about my own product in a minute because I'm in this space. I'm creating a STEM education product that is going to have a social aspect that allows kids to communicate with each other. So Reddit, yeah, GitHub, wow, and Steam, it's sort of a question of, whether some of these platforms are what you would consider to be traditional social media platforms, or whether they're platforms where, like Steam, like it's gaming, it's about playing the games more so than it is about socializing. But then you have voice chat and you have text chat and you have the ability to basically post on Steam. So GitHub, which is, primarily about software and source code, but then there's a social aspect to GitHub these days as well. So, but Inman Grant, the e-safety commissioner, said not all the platforms would be covered by the ban. Okay, so she's going to hear them all out. So the regulator wants to hear what the platforms have to say about sort of whether they should be in or whether they should be out of the ban. So companies are going to go through a self-assessment tool. Okay. So a self-assessment tool developed by the Australian e-safety commissioner to try to work out whether these companies should be exempt or whether they should be in. So Dr. Jennifer Duxbury, the Director of Policy, Regulatory Affairs and Research at Digital Industry Group Inc. So this is the industry body. This is the group in Australia that represents the interests in Australia of the big social media companies. It represents Discord, Google, Meta, TikTok, Snap and Twitch. Told the Senate inquiry some member companies still had concerns. So what are these concerns? I suppose there's concerns about enforcement. Can we actually find all users who are under 16 years? I suppose there's concerns about how do we actually do age verification on users who are coming into the platform? I wonder whether the platforms themselves outside of X are concerned about, the children's human rights angle, or whether it's more kind of about how they detect children's age, getting rid of existing accounts and trying to stop, young people from signing up for new accounts. I think there's an issue about implementation, as she says. Fair enough, it's starting in December. Have the platforms had enough time to get their platforms ready to actually get rid of existing accounts and block new ones? Platforms getting ahead of the ban. So Roblox has told ABC News it completed eSafety's self-assessment process and told the regulator it believed it was an exempted online gaming platform. So of course, Roblox is going to do this, probably Lego Play, probably Steam. They're going to say, well, because primarily we're about gaming and people playing games, so therefore we're not primarily about being a social network and allowing people to talk to each other, so therefore we should be out of the ban and not into the ban. Meta and X, of course, are not going to be able to get out of the ban. They're definitely in as social media companies. There was some talk in Australia some months ago about would YouTube be included? And YouTube themselves have said, well, no, because of the fact that we're just about hosting videos. And again, the primary purpose of YouTube is hosting videos, watching videos. It's not actually about being a social network where people are talking, although that's an increasing part of what YouTube is. And sort of, through super chats and live streams where people are chatting to each other, comments on videos. Even when you watch live videos on YouTube these days, you're getting kind of XP when you kind of become involved in the chat and you're trying to level up by being more active in the chat. So I guess YouTube's really kind of weighing into trying to get people to be more social on the platform because that drives engagement. So and with YouTube too, there was an argument about, well, there's a lot of educational videos on YouTube. So should YouTube then really be seen as being an education platform and not a social platform? And should it be in because kids find it useful, a lot of educational videos, and to ban it would be unfair to kids? And I think this plays into one of the big misconceptions about the ban, is that it's a ban on under 16s from having accounts, but it's not a ban necessarily on under 16s using the platform. So if a parent creates an account and then they let their kids use it, then that's okay. Also, it's not a ban on using these platforms in a logged out state. So with YouTube, for example, you can go to YouTube and you can search, you can watch videos, and you don't have to be logged in to do that. And if you're not logged in, then you don't kind of run afoul of this ban. It's only when you're under 16 and you want to create an account so that you can comment and you can do things that you would not be able to do in a logged out state. I guess this is a little bit more difficult for a platform like X because you can't use X in a logged out state anymore. Because one of the things that seemed to happen when Elon Musk took it over was that it's now kind of no, you have to have an account to be able to read anything in X whatsoever. So if you're under 16, I guess you would have to have an account. You can't use it logged out. So as I said before, it's Google's YouTube was originally meant to be exempt, but following an Australian government backflip, it's now included, it's in. And here's a question about VPNs in terms of enforceability. And in terms of the people who are speaking out against the social media ban, I think sort of kids' human rights is one of the big arguments. And I think the other big argument is just whether it's enforceable and whether people will be able to easily get around it, which of course we know that they will be. But then that leads to the next question of, well, even if it's not a perfectly enforceable law, does it mean that we don't have any law at all? So Duxbury from Digi admitting during Wednesday's Senate committee hearing that it was perfectly lawful for Australians to use VPNs. That's right. So, and saying that there was a spike in popularity of VPNs in the United Kingdom after online age checks were legislated there. So, what do you think? Comment down below. Is it a situation where if the law is not enforceable or it's really hard to enforce it and it's probably not going to be enforced, does that mean that we shouldn't be shackling platforms with the requirement to do age verification and to try to block under 16s? Or is it a situation where having this law in place is kind of sending a message? It's Australia saying we're worried about the harms that could be caused by social media. And we're saying, no, we don't think that it's okay for under 16s to be able to use the platforms. Regardless of whether it's perfectly enforceable, it's being able to actually say as a community what we think is acceptable and not, and what we think is right and wrong. So next article is from The Guardian, which is kind of going over similar themes, talking about X, calling for a delay, serious concerns about lawfulness. This is pretty similar to the stuff that was in the SMH article. Said in a submission to a Greens-led inquiry. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So the Senate inquiry being kind of led by the Greens, which is a kind of progressive left-wing political party in Australia, saying that, they need more time. We talked about that. Inman Grant says she doesn't intend to target companies for enforcement immediately on the 10th of December. So, okay, the E-Safety Commissioner might give you a little bit more time to become compliant, but we'll be looking for systemic failures. I wonder whether systemic failures is kind of code word for, we know that X are going to try to fight back and may not want to do it, so therefore we're going to go after them. This sort of idea of like, well, the platforms are kind of looking like they might be complying and they just need a bit of extra time, but they seem to be wanting to do the right thing, we'll go easy on them. But if it's X and they're going to go, no, we absolutely don't want to do it because, what did they say last year? That, the Inman Grant was the e-safety commissar or something like that. Maybe this is, code for we know that we're going to have trouble with X, so we're probably going to go after them first. I don't know. So X is basically saying, well, we don't want to have to go to all the trouble of doing this because, hey, it's only 1% of our platforms under 16, so leave us alone. We're not the problem. Go after Meta, I suppose, pointing the finger in a different direction. The human rights of children, as I've already mentioned, that was in the previous article. Children can evade the ban, which I've already talked about, saying a punitive regime that places the burden of responsibility for online activities of young people entirely on social networks. Okay. Company said, and poses a major threat to freedom of information, speech, and access to the internet. Yeah, but, again, I get it, right, in terms of banning kids from these services where they may have kind of communities. It might be where they kind of hang out with their friends, they get support if they're sort of, LGBT, for example. Although as an LGBT kid, I don't know that you're going to get much support on X. But like I said, is this not a kind of false dichotomy of saying that if kids can't use these particular social platforms, that they're just going to have no other way of communicating with people online? They're going to have no other way of forming up communities. They're going to just have to sit on their own in their houses, just going, oh, I've got no friends anymore, or I'm gay and I have nobody to talk to. I don't want to minimize the potential impact that this could have on kids, but it does make me wonder, sort of like, there are other better platforms out there, surely, and better systems that allow people to communicate, but which don't have the same kind of surveillance capitalism approach of these platforms. This idea of we really don't care about your well-being on the platform. We care about how long we can keep your eyeballs engaged onto the platform and engaged with the app, how long we can keep you scrolling, because that kind of contributes to the amount of data that we can get out of you, the number of ads that we can show to you. Surely these platforms are not the only way that people can communicate online. I think it was, and I know that I'm going to get this name wrong, it's Jerome Lanier, right, the American computer scientist. I think it was he who said that we've kind of got this expectation in society these days that for any two people to communicate with each other, the only way that can be facilitated online is when a sneaky third party pays to manipulate those two people, right?
So right now, we've created this bizarre society that's unprecedented where if any two people wish to communicate over the internet, the only way that can happen, the only way it's financed is through a third party who believes that those two can be manipulated in a sneaky way. It's an insane way to structure civilization.
It's for two people to connect through social media. That can only happen when you've got advertisers, when you've got data mining, when you've got the attention economy. And that's kind of sad because it's not how the internet used to be. So on to the next article from national technology reporter Ange Lavapierre, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that name wrong, who writes, it's a TV cliffhanger. It's been a dying art for a decade now, but Australia's teen social media ban is single-handedly reviving it. Okay, what's the cliffhanger? Questions as to how the saga will end have been piling up. Okay? Like any good TV drama, it's produced its share of intrigue. Which platforms will actually be covered? Which I talked about. Who's in and who's out? What's a VPN? How do the Wiggles feel about it? In case you don't know about the Wiggles, they're a bit of an Australian kids' entertainment icon. Google it. So the reply all along has been stay tuned. So who's going to be in or out? As we saw in the Information Age article, the eSafety Commissioner has kind of sent this self-assessment questionnaire to a long list of companies. They're going to self-assess against certain criteria, and then they're going to be ruled in or out. We know that X and Meta are definitely going to be in, but what about Roblox or what about Lego? So, sluggish mid-season ratings perked up with the bombshell reveal that age-checking technology isn't always as accurate as hoped. Shock horror, especially if you're close to 16 and not a white male. That's true. The issues these platforms have with detecting the age of people who are not white boys. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. There are many, many articles that have been written about that, the sort of different ways that we can do age verification. So does everybody have to submit government-issued photo ID and the kind of privacy implications with that? It seems like the answer is no. It's like the e-safety commissioner does not want, sort of every time that anybody in Australia opens a Facebook account, they have to scan their passport or their driver's license, and then the sort of cybersecurity risk that comes along with that information being passed around and stored. But then is it facial recognition, the kind of a biometric approach of we're going to look at your face and an AI is going to determine what your likely age is. But then, of course, that's got a kind of an error of plus or minus 1 or 2 years or more, depending on how you look, like Ange is saying there. Is it going to be a situation where if you've been on a platform with an account since, say, the year 2000, we know that you're not going to be under 16? That's been floated as an idea, and that seems likely. Is it going to be a situation where the platforms are looking at the videos that you're posting up, the pictures you're posting, maybe trying to deduce your age from the content that you've already posted? Are they going to look at the kind of things that you're writing? Is this something a 25 or a 30-year-old would write? Maybe. I mean, that's been floated out there. That would be interesting. So yes, with less than 3 months to go, the season's biggest mystery remains unsolved. How will they actually check who's over 16? That's right, the latest cliffhanger. Expectations, the answer would become clear from Julie Inman Grant, but there was no big reveal, saying that it was going to be a principles-based approach. Age-checking systems should be reliable, accurate, robust, and effective. What does that actually mean? Like I said, is it scanning faces? Is it checking IDs? Using third-party data from the App Store? So maybe if you've downloaded the app through Google Play Store or you've got it through iTunes Store. Do they call it iTunes Store? Sorry. I'm showing my age here, the App Store. You're getting it through the App Store, you're getting it through Google Play. If you've got a credit card associated with that account, then does that give us some indication that you're not under 16? Yeah. We don't know. Addressing the media on Tuesday, this was last week, the Commissioner said that the audience might have been expressing the audience. It is really a TV show with a cliffhanger, isn't it? Might have been expecting something less vague. But this is kind of par for the course with laws and government regulations, right? Like they're kind of reluctant to write into the law specific technologies because they know that that's not going to age. If we're looking at what the law is going to be saying in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, technology may have moved on significantly since then. I've got to say I'm no legislator and I'm no expert on the law, but I have worked in a government department where I've had to understand Australian government regulations, and so I'm familiar with the principles of how we put these things together. Usually we don't kind of embed specific technologies or specific approaches. We kind of talk more about principles, the sort of broad strokes of what needs to be done. It's a clear expectation that they provide more than one way to demonstrate. Okay, so a waterfall where ID is never the only option. So we might have a layered approach of AI analysis of the photos that you've posted up, as well as do you have a credit card on file and things like that. So not just kind of like just provide your passport or your driver's license and then that's it. It's a kind of an age gate that uses one document. So she says that she doesn't expect perfection. This is the Safety Commissioner, but what we'll be looking at is systemic failures. So if you're a tech company and you have this kind of age verification technology on your platform, is it so weak that it's making a lot of mistakes? I wonder whether the government's going to test this. Do you think the E-Safety Commissioner is going to kind of create fake profiles of like 13 and 14-year-olds and go and try and do sign-ups? Or do they already have profiles that they're going to try to use to sort of verify whether this is working properly? I wonder how that's going to work. Yeah, which is exactly what we have here, right? The exact definition of systemic failures is yet another mystery, so we don't know. I'm kind of just guessing as well. What do you think? Put it down in the comments. It's unclear just how reliable, accurate, robust and effective age-checking methods will need to be in order to avoid attracting a $50 million fine. Well, I mean, I suppose up to a $50 million fine, but yeah, wow. Okay, so here's maybe an answer to my previous question. The regulator will have the power to force companies to hand over internal data as part of compliance checks. Yeah, right. Okay, so maybe it's going to be a situation where the E-Safety Commissioner will assess how well a platform's doing based on data that they have to report themselves, which probably makes sense because tech companies themselves, they have a lot of internal data and a lot of internal tracking. Like they would know themselves how well they're actually keeping people on or off the platform depending on age. And I was reading somewhere, I can't think of where I read this, I don't have any source for it, but that these companies already have a really good idea actually internally of the age of users. And that would make perfect sense because of the fact that these companies are all involved in trying to understand the demographic of every user so that you can target advertising at them and you can kind of categorize their data on demographics. And so, yeah, they would have a really good, you would think that they would have built the best tools to try to actually look at the content that people post up and the pictures of people and kind of work out from that the age of people. So it shouldn't really be a big kind of mystery to these platforms as to the age of their users, and it shouldn't be really too difficult for them to find out, you would have thought. The big reveal, an educated guess may be good enough in many cases. Okay, so an educated guess as to a person is known as age inference, okay, and may figure more prominently in the final shape of the policy than anyone initially imagined. Existing data may be sufficient to satisfy providers that the account holder is over the age of 16. That's really interesting. So going back to what I just said, like if platforms already have really good kind of internal data about the age of their users, well, they can just use that to kind of cut all of the users who are under 16 and to keep all of the ones who are over 16. And maybe this will then assist them in terms of filtering out new users as well. So age inference can be remarkably accurate. Consider how long an account has existed. It's exactly what I was saying before. The interests and personal networks of the user. What kind of things would you have to like and would you have to follow and would you have to be watching for them to determine that you're like 40 or 50 or 60 years old, do you think? You know, this takes me back to, I don't know whether anybody remembers the Leisure Suit Larry games of the 1990s. These were like risque video games for over 18s back in the day when it was like, you didn't really have good graphics on computers. The graphics were pretty crude. If you're under 18, don't go and look this up, obviously. But for those in my audience who are over 18, and for those who are around in the 90s and the 80s, late 80s, you probably remember those games. And you remember they had this kind of quiz where to try to get into the game and to play the game and see potentially naughty content for over 18s, you had to answer all these questions which were meant to determine whether you were an old person. And they'd ask you about kind of who was the president of this particular year and who was the performer in this band. I can't remember the exact questions, but things that only oldies were supposed to know. I wonder whether you could kind of game the system here similarly. Can you go on YouTube and just watch a lot of oldies videos, or go on Facebook and like really kind of uncool bands from the 70s and the 60s or something? What do you think? So yeah, if all your friends are 13 and you speak and write like a 13-year-old and your online activity drops off in school hours. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, or if all your friends are in their 40s, exactly what I was saying. Key appeal of age inference is no extra data is required, so it's frictionless. I wonder how that does work on sign-up, though, because it's probably frictionless for existing users. And I think there's been a concern in Australia about, well, when it comes to the 10th of December, are we all going to be forced to go on Facebook, or are we all going to be forced to go on Discord and give scans of our driver's licenses and passports? Because that would really suck. I've got to tell you, I don't want to do that. So, this frictionless thing probably works well for existing users. I guess Facebook can probably work out, that I'm following people who are older. Discord can work out that I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm in Discords and talking to people who are of a particular age. And so it's frictionless from the point of view of I won't be kicked off. Like, my account won't turn into a pumpkin on midnight on December the 10th. But how does that work with new signups, though? Because if you haven't provided any content to the platform, how is it going to know? Do you have to, I don't know, does it like let you free ride on the platform for a while before you get booted off? And if you follow too many 13-year-olds, then you get removed? I don't know. What do you think? Okay, so what do we got further down here? Communications Minister Arnica Wells said platforms know an awful lot about us already, and millions of Australians could be about to learn exactly how much. So yeah, probably for 90% of Australians, it will be totally frictionless come December because they already know your age and a lot more about you than your age. So, yeah. So on to the next article, which is from Crikey, and Cam Wilson writes, these experts will decide if the teen social media ban is a success or not. Australia's e-safety commissioner has tapped a group of academics who will track the success of the teen social media ban. Interesting. Experts drawn from Australian and global universities will collect and examine data on the intended and unintended consequences of the ban. So Grant's office says, not going to specify what data will be collected, but it will involve looking at short-term and medium-term impacts on children and young people. What kind of impacts do you think? Are they going to sort of track, like, I don't know, do kids who are banned from social media become happier, and do they become healthier, or do they become kind of more upset because they can't socialise online? I'm not sure. So the academics are chosen through a detailed independent selection process, will not be paid for their involvement. So collectively, the group brings unique and specialised experience in adolescent mental health, child and adolescent development, family dynamics and digital media use. Wow. So all of the academic stuff, the experts in the field about the harms and the benefits, the risks and the rewards. Psychiatric epidemiology, digital parenting. Wow. The group's range of experts means there'll be a rich diversity of perspectives. And kind of it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, right? Because no doubt in academia, and I've seen this from some of the academics that I've speak to or things that I've read from academics that I follow, some of them believe that there are real harms and that this is a really great idea, and others do believe that it's a violation of children's human rights and it's an overreach or it's the wrong kind of policy and approach. So I think it'd be interesting to see what comes out of academia in terms of the pros and the antis, what they feel one way or the other. Although I wonder whether I'm getting back into kind of false dichotomy territory, which I'll touch on in a minute. So the Social Media Lab's founding director, Professor Jeff Hancock, acknowledged that social media can be very detrimental, but has previously advocated against viewing social media as a monolith. So this goes back to what I was saying before about, is all social media equally bad? Is it just kind of Instagram and TikTok that are really bad? Is YouTube not so bad because kids spend a lot of their time just watching videos and that's not particularly harmful and they're not getting kind of attacked or trolled in the comments? I don't know. Prior to the ban becoming law, a group of 140 Australian and international experts signed a letter opposing the policy. So this is interesting. I did read this when it came out, Western Sydney University. The letter is a joint effort by the steering committee members of the Australian Child Rights Task Force, with Professor Amanda Third and Professor Philippe co-directors of the Young and Resilient Research Centre. This is interesting. So again, academics having differences of opinion about what's harmful, what's not harmful, what's the impact on children's rights. Their concerns were bans affect rights to access and participation, which is what I said earlier, and what X has been saying, the UN Committee on Rights of the Child. Parental consent does not fix unsafe products. I mean, that's an interesting one. So, children will be banned from having an account, but they won't be banned from using social media. They can use it in a logged out state, or if their parents create an account for them, then they can still use it. Just because parents create an account for their children and say, yeah, I trust you, I think you're mature enough, you can go and use it, we're not kind of putting the pressure on those social media companies to improve their act then, are we? We're sort of just saying, well, all of the burden is on the parents to decide whether or not their kids should be able to use it, and or we're putting burden on the companies to try to block people with an age gate. But why are we not putting burden on the companies to actually kind of fundamentally reform and change the way the systems work to make them inherently safer? I mean, that's a good question. Maybe the companies are just unable or unwilling to do that. Implementing the ban effectively remains a challenge, we talked about before. So parents and carers often are not the experts, but they'll be still asked to make informed decisions. So again, kids are going to be saying to mum and dad, hey, please create an account for me so that I can keep using it. And the parents are going to have to say, well, you're 12, you're 13, is it safe enough for you to use the platform yet? And that's putting that burden onto parents who are not experts. Implementing it effectively is a challenge. As I talked about, can kids get around it? Creates more risks for children who may still use platforms. Yeah, so is it going to be a situation where platforms say, well, hey, we put in the age gate, nobody under 16 is allowed to use the platform anymore, so just let it rip. Well, we're going to stop trying to actually clean up the content on the platform, or we're not going to clean it up as much because we're going to assume that, hey, everybody here is over 18 or over 16, so it's all good. I don't know, good question. And fails to drive up safety standards, which was one of the previous points. Yeah, so again, it's not kind of putting the pressure on the social media companies to try to clean up their act. Some social media type services appear to be too integral to childhood to be banned. For example, short-form video streamers. It's an interesting question, too integral to childhood. And I mean, this goes back to the question that I keep posing, do children have to use social media? Is it something that's integral to childhood? And where if you take it away, you're kind of preventing them from learning about social media, learning about technology, learning about the online environment. You're preventing them from being able to interact with their friends, their support groups. I don't know. Or is it a situation where there could be better alternatives, which I'll come to in a minute? So anyway, that's that open letter. Going back to the Crikey article, so These are some of the members of the academic panel that have been kind of put together to see whether the ban is going to be effective or not. So from the Stanford University Media Lab, members of the academic advisory group from, we've got Macquarie University, Bath Spa from the UK, American Psychological Association. Okay, I mean, this is interesting. And I mean, maybe this goes back to the idea of being an international panel and, you know, the interest that Ursula von der Leyen took in the presentation of this policy at the UN General Assembly last week. You know, we kind of get the idea this is Australia going out first, right? We're going out ahead of the world. We're like, we're going to do this first. We're going to have this panel of people to look at how well it works or doesn't work. And maybe it becomes a blueprint to be rolled out in other countries. I kind of find it hard to believe that the US could do this. I think the US having sort of the First Amendment and stronger kind of enshrined rights to free speech than Australia has. So going back to what I was saying at the start of the video, is this a false dichotomy? Are we setting up this kind of false comparison between kids' safety online and free speech or kids' human rights? I think it is a false dichotomy, but there's some truth in both sides. You think about social media platforms being about attention, about keeping you scrolling, about keeping you engaged. They don't really care about how happy you are or your well-being so much as how much data can we extract? How many ads can we push to you? How much can we learn about you? How much can we kind of keep you on there scrolling? And so I think that it makes sense to sort of say that there need to be limitations on these platforms in terms of children's use of them if we feel as if they're harmful. I think it is a good idea that we require social media companies to clean up their act, but how realistic is that? These are companies whose business model is about clicking, it's about scrolling, it's learning everything about you, it's, you know, giving you lots and lots of ads. That's what they do, that's their business model. How realistic is it that they're going to change? But then on the human rights angle, kids' human rights are valid and they're important. It's a situation where they do need to be able to express themselves. They do need to be able to communicate with their friends. I mean, I suppose when I was growing up, I'd pick up the telephone and I'd do that, or maybe even send a fax. It's just, again, I'm showing my age and how much of a nerd that I was. But it's important for kids to be able to communicate, to create groups, to be able to express themselves. But then I'd say if that expression and those friendships are important, does that have to happen through these social media platforms which we know are harmful? I don't think that needs to be the case. So with my own company, Glina Creative, and my Micro System 1 computer kit, I'm trying to give kids the tools to create their own online social spaces. These are spaces that they own and that they control. And I think that this could be a viable alternative to kind of, you know, kids' rights versus unrestricted access to big tech platforms. Why can't we create our own online social spaces? It's almost sort of Web 2.0 gave us the ability to create content, and through that content we could express ourselves. But we're expressing ourselves and we're presenting our content to others through a framework and through a venue which has been entirely constructed by other people. And as it turns out, it's been constructed and operated by other people who really kind of have intentions that are not all that well aligned with our best interests. So my thoughts are, you know, social media bad, yes, but kids' human rights important on the other hand also. I worry that it's descending into this kind of Elon Musk versus e-safety commissioner shitfight, for lack of a better term, right? Like, I think this is distracting us from potentially better options. Why not give kids the tools that they could use to create their own online social spaces? These are spaces where kids could have privacy. They could have the ability to moderate the spaces they see fit, to control what's going on in that space, and a sense of ownership over that space. So I'll leave you with that thought and that question. If you want to hear more from me about what I think about the kids' social media ban, about the e-safety commissioner, about social media in general, if you want to learn more about my STEM education kit and what I'm trying to do in this space, then please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.